Well, welcome guys to another video. I got a pretty exciting one for those of you out there who like when we talk about story, when we talk about lore, the plot, we speculate about where the game might go. If you're out of the loop, Christ, I'm starting every video lately with this, and I hope you're not out of the loop at this point, but last week ArenaNet announced a big move. They've revealed that the future of the game expansions are going to look quite different. They're going to be basically self-contained stories, largely self-contained stories. They're going to be slightly smaller in scope, but they're going to be much more regular, like as quick as yearly. So we're going a little bit more into an Elder Scrolls Online or Destiny style approach, I suppose, here. And this really is going to affect the kind of plot lines we'll be dealing with. The other big story, obviously, is for the past 10 years with Guild Wars 2, they have been focused on one main idea, that's the Elder Dragons, and that is now done. They've rushed it to its conclusion through the Icebrood Saga and End of Dragons, and now it's open skies. It's whatever they could possibly want it to be. And in a lot of ways, when I looked at this news, I was a bit nervous about it, because I thought, are they really going to be able to do exciting things? Are we really going to have that many new, interesting places to go to? Of course, the other thing that's been going on with Guild Wars 2 for all these years is we've mostly just been retreading areas that were in the original game. You know, we eventually went back to the Maguma Jungle, a place that you could explore in the original game, and then we went to Elona, and then we went to the Crystal Desert with it as well. And then finally we went to Cantha. Now, not only have there been all these big fundamental changes, but they've ran out of Guild Wars 1 content to take us back through. We could go anywhere, do anything. So, I put my thinking cap on, and I thought, well, okay, what could they do? There are a lot of new mysteries and plot threads and ideas that they can tug on. There are places in the in-game world map, as you can see here, that it's exciting and captivating to think about us traveling to. So that's what this video is, the result of a quick brainstorm from yours truly, someone who follows the story, understands the lore to a reasonable degree. Where might we go? What would I find most exciting? I have 14 ideas, and that's quite a lot of ideas. But you'll see, hopefully they're pretty good. Now, this is in no particular order, though some of the meatier ideas, you know, we'll just jump into straight away, some of the more obvious things. Now, just to be honest, the commentary on this is a bit weird, because I tried to shoot this where I explained all the details or kept it high level for like any new players that might come in with the Steam release or, you know, are newly here with End of Dragons. But then I've kind of quickly realized fully explaining every mystery and idea here is going to make the video way too long. So it's a bit odd. I gloss over some stuff, I go into details on others. Just bear with me. But yeah, so let's see. Starting off number 1. And I've come up with these crappy fanfiction names for these, I do apologise. Zoteka, the Isle Out of Time, I'm calling this. So, what's the idea for this mini X-Pack? Well, this would be picking up the idea of the Lost Guild Wars 1 campaign. Those of you that don't know, back in the day with Guild Wars 1, they released the original game, a story in an area of the world, then another one in Cantha, then another one in Elona. They were planning to do another story. It was going to be on this continent, this place called Zoteka. It was going to be a big time travel-y story in which a bunch of old characters were all there at the same time, but it got cancelled. Through development issues, the devs decided they wanted to make a sequel MMO and do a lot of things differently, like implement jumping and swimming and things that Guild Wars 1 just didn't support, and away they went. But what that meant was they'd created a lot of lore and ideas, assets, vibes, that never ended up becoming anything because it got scrapped. Over the years, they've revealed little pieces of information about this supposed island out of time, a place called Zoteka, but it didn't seem like it would ever really be a thing until kind of recently when an official Guild Wars 2 art book released that has a bunch of lore information about Zoteka and talks about it as though it's canon. So immediately people are starting to think, wow, okay, hold on, does this actually exist, Interior? Is there a place, Zoteka? Now, there's a tricky thing with this story, which is that a lot of the ideas they had for Zoteka and like the assets and the art that they were making before it got cancelled, that just got rolled into the Guild Wars 1 expansion, Eye of the North, and therefore into Guild Wars 2. So in the past, I've kind of wondered, well, can they do Zoteka? Because half the assets that they had have already been repurposed. Do they even really have that much? Now we hear about mini X-Packs, and well, actually, suddenly I think Utopia, this cancelled campaign, Zoteka, actually kind of works super well. It fits the idea of a mini X-Pack excellently. And I think it could be a really good thing to run into about now, just as we're leaving the Elder Dragon story and looking to something new. Because a big idea for this campaign was old characters from different areas of the lore would be alive again through like time travel shenanigans or bundled together, but only on this island. And so, you know, if they did that now, you could have characters like Traherne back for a while. You could interact with Guild Wars 1 characters in Guild Wars 2, because, you know, there's this fear with the game right now where it's like, well, they can no longer nostalgia bait for Guild Wars 1 characters because it's all over. Well, not technically. If they did Zoteka, you could see Devonna in Guild Wars 2, for example, or whatever. You know, the original idea, I think, was her father, Mordecai, was going to be on the island. So anyway, these are exciting ideas. It also allows them to deal with some of the mysteries that have been set up. Way back when Utopia was actually going to be a thing, they actually introduced this NPC called Baltek. Baltek was this mysterious, weird, enigmatic bastard of a man who was a hint and a suggestion as to the campaign that got cancelled. So Baltek has just been like this weird mystery ever since. Well, this story could feature Baltek. It could feature that char that's stuck in a causal time loop that was introduced in one of the new Living World, well, I say new, recent-ish Living World updates and current event updates. So there are things they can do here. Even the Extra Life quest chain that they did very recently, just over this Halloween, kind of was talking a bit about some old characters like Jadon that I'd love to see as Zoteka. I see this as totally plausible. The main storyline could be something new, obviously not Elder Dragon related. It could be to do with chronomancers who have to fight back against some threat. Who knows? And I would say, look, you would have all 3 maps just on the new island continent. There's an idea. Number 2, I'm calling this one Destruction's Depths. So this is an idea for a mini X-Pack where we are doing the depths of Tyria. You remember a second ago where I said that we've gone everywhere that Guild Wars 1 showed us? Well, kind of, but in another way, kind of not. Because Guild Wars 1 demonstrated to us that there's a whole world beneath our feet, filled with massive epic caverns and lost civilizations, some that may even be thriving way down below us. The idea of one of the Elder Dragons, Primordus, was that it threatened some of those civilizations, and some of them ran away, like the Asura, to come to the surface. Well, now Primordus is gone, and we've sort of looked at the depths a bit. You might consider the map Tangled Depths in Heart of Thorns to be the depths of Tyria. You might consider some other little places, maybe the Deepstone Fractal, for example. But the truth is, I think there's a huge amount of expansion they can do to the world building and interesting lore. There were even some little mysteries about who left the ruins there from Guild Wars 1. I would like a mini X-Pack all about the depths of Tyria. And the story writes itself, really. What have we got that got rushed through in the Icebrood Saga and in End of Dragons? Well, the resurgence of the dwarves. You know, the dwarves are this race that turned themselves to stone to do battle with Primordus. And they finally started to appear a little bit just recently. But we didn't really get much story with them, and now Primordus is gone. So let's have a real expansion, let's have a real storyline where we deal with them, and we see what their place in the world is. Is the effects of the Rite of the Great Dwarf going to wear off now? Can we get more story about the Stone Summit and stuff? Are we going to see that the dwarves want to come and live in the mountains? Because that's a big thing. Now that the Elder Dragons are gone, all the races are probably going to shuffle around. So an expansion about the dwarves coming to the surface, maybe. But also, the Asura of Rat Asumanson, well, they don't have to flee anymore. Maybe the Asura would be more comfortable underground. And so this can be an expansion about the dwarves coming up and the Asura going down and exploring beneath again. The Asura may be reconnecting with ancient other Asuran civilizations that never left in the first place, and they're more like the gremlins we saw back in the original game. There's so much rich story that we can get here. And the maps would be very obvious, I think. So I think you could have a map in the Shiver Peaks, the Deljamore front. You could have a dwarven-looking map up there, where they're sort of resettling places that maybe the Norn haven't touched. And then I would say the other 2 maps for this expansion should be Depths of Tyria maps, where we really get super underground, and we get this big, massive, epic scale idea of how dark it can be down there, and how vast and cavernous these places can be. Now, I want to say, making this video, I kind of realized that this idea you're only going to get 3 maps for an expansion sounds pretty rough. Because if you want to do like the depths of Tyria, you want the depths all over Tyria. You want to see what's beneath the Maguma jungle, what's beneath the Crystal Desert, what's beneath Ascalon, what's beneath Kryta. You want loads of places, and the idea you only get 2 maps kind of sounds like you might not be able to. But I think what you need to imagine some of these maps might be like is they'll be like fragments, right? They'll be kind of abstracted exactly where these little tunnels you are in, where each individual cave and cell of activity might be. If you guys are very familiar with the game, if you think about the way that Fractals of the Mists work, fractals technically all take place on one map, but the way it's themed and designed and implemented is you don't really get that sense. You get an idea that you're on just a different island every time and everything feels very different. The fact that mechanically, functionally, it's all the same map isn't something you have to think about. And I think this kind of fragmented map experience would work very well for the depths, you know? It's like how, technically, in Metrica Province, there's an Asura Gate event that you can do, and you go into this Asura Gate, and the idea is you're now in the depths of Tyria. You're really low down, there's lava everywhere. In truth, you're on the same map, and you're just like in this little corner, but that doesn't really have to affect anything. So, I know ArenaNet in this post have suggested there'll be like 3 maps, but they can do it in clever ways where it still feels like you're going all over Tyria through these different, you know, tunnels connected by surrogates and stuff, just like they did really in Guild Wars 1 with Eye of the North. So I love this idea of a depths expansion. Next, we have the Kraken Deep. Well, if you're going to have an expansion underground, I really think we're still looking for an underwater expansion. For a long time, it felt like End of Dragons would be that. Let's face it, it's really not. Even if it had the skiffs and fishing and, you know, the Elder Dragon we're dealing with was the Water Dragon, it's not the thing we were thinking of, right? I want an expansion where we meet the Lagos, their full civilization. We find their underwater cities. We learn a ton more about the Tetios Compact and their houses, and, you know, Saya comes back as a story, you know, because we haven't really seen her very much. We learn what the Lagos are all about, especially, again, now that they're not threatened by Elder Dragons. However, there's a really good idea for an enemy in this expansion, a proper underwater expansion. End of Dragons has set up a new mystery. They explained that when Su-Won woke up and went to help out the Canthons, she left the waters of the world. She wasn't responsible for the weird tentacles and other scary things. Su-Won was not responsible for pushing the Quaggan away, or pushing the Karka away, or threatening the Lagos. Something else is out there in the water. A new enemy. Something eldritch, something scary, possibly demonic. We already have a big villain, an Elder Dragon-esque villain that they can do an expansion storyline around. And again, I'm not really listing these in order in this video, so I'm not advocating that they do it straight away. Maybe it's a good idea to have a bit of a break from giant monster enemies, and then when they want to do another one, well, look, we have this underwater expansion here. And yeah, they can deal with the Karka, the Quaggan, all those displaced races. It's very easy as well. 3 maps. I think you'd have 3 underwater maps. You'd have one, I think, that I imagine it would be like big ocean, open oceans, fast-moving currents that you can get caught up in. Maybe one of the features... I'm trying not to talk about features with these expansions. I just want to talk about story. But, you know, you could have all kinds of cool masteries and even like a new underwater mountain stuff that would come in with an expansion like this. But you'd have one map that's big, open ocean with a Lagos city in it. Think a bit like how Amnoon was a city that came in with Path of Fire, but it was still only a portion of a larger map. I think like that. Just like how Amnoon was a part of the Crystal Oasis, we would have the Lagos city and civilization as a portion of a larger map. That'd be one map. Another map, I think, actually, it would be a good idea to go to like a string of islands, like an island chain and all of their surrounding water, just so there is some land combat. Obviously, a whole expansion, you want land stuff. And in fact, I think we have a really good candidate for that. Back in Season 2, there was a sneaky world map that you could find printed on a carpet. And here's the image, if you guys look on screen. This showed the further, more distant areas of Tyria. All these places that maybe we could have expansions and stuff in. Well, if you look here very carefully in the center, there are these lines showing shipping lanes, showing the idea of trade and communication between not just Tyria and Cantha and Elona, but other mysterious, strange places. So look at this island chain here that supposedly there are like shipping lanes to. I think that this would be a really good place for us to learn about. And, you know, this kind of island hopping experience would be great as a part of, you know, some kind of deep water expansion. Obviously, one of these other island chains is the Battle Isles, which we could visit, like a PvP region from Guild Wars 1. I'll come back to that later. But yeah, I like this really mysterious one. I like the idea that one of the maps is there. And then, of course, the third and final map, well, it's got to be super deep down in the ocean where it's pitch black and creepy and there's phosphorescent enemies and anglerfish and we fight this Kraken evil thing. Also, by the way, this expansion could be when we see, like, the tidal wave attack on Lion's Arch and see how they defend themselves and all that kind of stuff. So number 3. Number 4, we've got what I'm calling the Flight of the Tengu. Aha! So, yes, we had a bit of Tengu in End of Dragons. There's still a lot more to see, though, because there's, of course, the Dominion of Winds. this huge area behind a wall in Tyria. The Tengu that live there are very different to the Tengu we have found in Cantha. The Tengu we found in Cantha seem to be pretty, enlightened and pretty friendly and pretty nice. The Tengu in the Dominion of Winds are a lot more isolationist, cautious about the world. They've been hiding there for years and years and years and years. I think finally we get an expansion where we get to see this place and we get to see the Tengu from the south, the Canthan Tengu, interact with these northern ones. And I kind of love that. For years and years and years, it felt like Guild Wars was going to be the place where we would get the northern Tengu first and then we would go with them to the southern Tengu. But now it's like, that's actually going to be completely flipped on its head. So what else would be in this expansion, though? Just the Dominion of Winds? Well, that's one map. Well, I think what I would do here is I would pair this with some of the other local issues and things that are going on around Corteria, but nonetheless are really exciting. So this is where I would have the Big Wizard's Tower story. I would deal with this mysterious floating tower hanging in the sky above Garenhof, this creepy idea of this wizard that lives there that might be a necromancer, might be trying to manipulate people's souls, might be related to a cult of necromancers we saw there, the cult of Verata in Guild Wars 1. I actually have a fairly old video about all of this, but if you guys want to check it out, you'll get a good sense of this mystery. I think it would be time here to do this. And you can even have like Tengu themselves, because they're nearby, trying to go up there. Once upon a time, the Wizard's Tower was within the Dominion of Winds. So, maybe they have information for us. I've always loved the idea that the end of that tower is a big story about the Titans or something, one of these big villains from Guild Wars 1. They could bring those back. But yeah, so I think that you can get an expansion out of all of that stuff. I would say one map is the Dominion of Winds. That would be a city. And actually, I think as well, this expansion, again, I don't want to talk about features too much, but they could add a new playable race here, the Tengu, and this new map would be a leveling map. I think that's an interesting idea. Then you could have another map that maybe is related to the Delesio Seaboard, which is kind of another big region of Kryta that we can't access, one that's right next to the Wizard's Tower. And finally, I think you could have a final map that's also Tengu related, possibly Shinji Island. Like, I look at a lot of these areas in Ender Dragons and I'm sad that we may never go there. So maybe this expansion would be a time for that. You could go back to Saitung, or like the Kirin Peak, for example. And look at some of these other Tengu tribes, the Angchu, really dig into them, because End of Dragons had so much else it wanted to talk about with Aurene and Suwon and stuff. Let's have a moment where we really look at the Tengu, and we can make them playable races at the same time. Number 5. So I'm just calling this Dern's Homeland. Now this is not, I don't have too much to go on this one, and this is where we get a little bit more open. If you guys aren't aware, if you join the Order of Whispers when you play through the game, there is a kind of a bigwig in the Order of Whispers that you can meet, and at one very specific moment in the story, you can like recognize his name's a bit weird. He's got like a Hispanic name, which a lot of names don't really derive from that interior. And the commander says, "Oh, you've got an interesting name. Where are you from?" And he gives you this incredibly cryptic, bizarre, strange message, suggesting that he's from some very weird place that we've never heard anything about. We really don't have a clue. So where is that place? Well, as the lore currently stands, it could be like Zoteka if you want it to be, or whatever. I actually think that this could be a totally different place. Again, going back to that Derman Priory carpet map, well, maybe this is one of these mysterious places off in the distance. Perhaps this is the Sunrise Crest area, as it's labelled on the map. And so, yeah, we kind of go to a whole new continent there. Guild Wars 1 style, where there's a big new island. We know nothing about it. We know nothing about who lives there or what's going on. We have just a very, very light little mystery teasing it. That's Dern, this Order of Whispers character. And we go there and we see what's going on. Maybe we go with a band of adventuring Norn that are curious about the world. Now, another interesting mystery that's going on with Guild Wars at the moment, kind of a mystery, is one of the main characters, Bram. His father is dead really before we get to know him in the game, but there's a short story where Bram is talking to his father, and the guy's called Borge the Sun Chaser. And we don't really know anything about Borge the Sun Chaser. We know that ethnically he's not much like a lot of the other Norn that you find in the Shiver Peaks. And so there's this idea that maybe Borge, like Dern, is from this sunny, tropical climate other continent. So I would say, yeah, let's do that as well. Let's have Bram be a major character in this story. Bram goes there, learns more about his father, maybe learns a bit more about Air and how Air and his father met, because we have so little information about that. You could meet Bram's uncles, for example, and Bram's aunts and his grandparents on his father's side. This strange character, Borge the Sun Chaser. I think that's all really, really cool. And you could definitely get an expansion out of that. This is now an example where, as well, ArenaNet would be completely free and at liberty to write anything they like, because there's just so little concrete that they have set up before. And I assume that one of the reasons they rushed out of the Elder Dragon story was to have that kind of experience, and there it is for them. And I know in some ways Bram isn't the most fascinating of characters, but I love the idea of Norn in just like really sunny climates, like nothing mountainous at all. I feel like that's an interesting like contrast and juxtaposition. Like I look at this art in the background here, this image, and I think, yeah, it'd be kind of cool to see Bram find he has roots in someplace really hot. The one thing I would say that they probably do need to pay attention to with locations like this and stories like this is the end of Dragons. I have a lot of problems with the writers and what they did at the end of Dragons, but one thing you'll notice is they basically suggested the whole world was being attacked by the Void. Like we had these flash sideways back up to the Shiver Peaks and stuff. Places miles and miles and miles away from the Jade Sea were under the influence and attack of the Void. Now that they've demonstrated that, they kind of do, if we're going to go to a new place like the Sunrise Crest really far away, they'll probably have an opportunity there to talk a bit more about, oh, the Void Crisis happened there too. So what did that look like? What happened with these people? What was going on there? And I hope ArenaNet don't neglect that. One of the things I liked about End of Dragons was when we got there, we found out that like the Zaitan tidal wave had really affected them. That was cool to see that other areas, even though they've been off screen, have been influenced by the effects of the story in a major way. Well, I'd like to see that for the Sunrise Crest as well, and anywhere else, because the ending with the Void everywhere, it probably shouldn't be ignored. Next, we've got a really terrible title here. I'm sure you guys will love it though. I've called it the Legend of Joko, i.e. Path of Fire 2. What do I mean by this? Well, I think there's space for an expansion dealing with the Order of Shadows. Really cool, strange faction, splinter group that came off of the Order of Whispers with some really dodgy, scary ideas about them. Interesting story threads that never went anywhere. I think there's a lot of story left to be told with the Sunspears now that they have, risen to prominence again and, apparently fighting the good fight and wresting control of Elona. Basically, there's a huge amount of fallout in the Elonan region we didn't get to look at at all because we rushed out of Elona to deal with Kralkatorrik. And then just kind of chilled, I guess, while waiting for the start of the Icebreed Saga. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of really cool things they can do. The Awakened as well. I think the Awakened are an amazing faction. And they've lost their Lich leader. They've lost Joko. They have their sentience, their free will. Well, what do they choose to do with that? What's going on at the Bone Palace? And what's going on with the Janundu? And you might say, well, WP, but where do we explore? How is that a new story? These are interesting characters, and it's a really cool setting, but haven't we already been there? Well, I think that you do a map, basically. One of them, I'd love to revisit the Desolation, like the border of the Desolation, maybe. We can look at the fallout of the Brand as well and see what's going on there. You can do one thing with the Desolation, which never got a look in anywhere in any living world or anything, and had very little story originally. But then I think, actually, the new region is Dizlana. Dizlana is a huge area to the right of Path of Fire and the Elonan regions. It was being even talked about and hinted about in Guild Wars 1. Well, let's finally go there. There are some interesting little tidbits of story there as well, that maybe this is the homeland of the Harpies. And the Harpies are a really interesting faction because we just look at them as these creepy, idiotic, like, bird people that, often played for comic relief. But actually, there is some suggestions that maybe they were once a great, angelic, beautiful race. Perhaps even, you might speculate, associated with the race that Dwayna, one of the human gods, is a party to. And something happened to them, and they fell from grace, a little bit like the Jotun. And there's a lot of really cool, meaty ideas there that actually could even connect a Dizlana story to the human gods. And that is very ripe stuff for even more expansions down the line. So I'm very fascinated by Dizlana. I think it's got cool art here on the map, as you can see. So yeah, I think a Dizlana expansion that basically is about, these people that we see in Elona and kind of following up with a lot of that stuff, I think would be good. This expansion as well might be our last opportunity to see the Scavenger's Causeway, or remember the gate near Ebonhawk that takes you to the Crystal Desert, and yet that map never got implemented. Well, maybe finally we can get there. Maybe this is where this stuff gets slotted in. It is a bit tricky with only 3 maps per, era, but I can kind of see that working. Next, this is an expansion idea that I really, really like, and especially for people who are fans of the Sylvari, I think this would go down very well. The Sylvari kind of got a bit overdone, I think, for a long time. Core was very Sylvari heavy, and then Living World was, Season 1 and 2 was very Sylvari heavy, and then Heart of Thorns was very Sylvari heavy. Since then, though, we've kind of been easing out of it. There's a lot of big questions here. So, I'm calling this Malik and the Origin of the Sylvari. So, this would be an expansion where Canuck, Larenthir, some of my favourite characters. These guys are major characters. So, as well, I think each of these expansions, you can rotate out. You can bring back a couple of characters we know about, just a couple, but then introduce lots of new ones at the same time, and it's kind of their story. But I would bring back some of these fan favourites, Sylvari. Larenthir especially, I think, is awesome. Last week, he's had very little story involvement for years and years and years. I think there's a cool document in the Icebrood Saga sort of looking sideways at him. So we get these guys back. But what is the central idea of this expansion? Well, it's about the other pale trees for the Sylvari. Let's not remember, okay, the pale tree that the Sylvari are all coming from was planted from a seed. A man found a seed in a cave with other seeds in it. So the question is, where did those seeds come from? What happened? And in the personal story, if you play as a Sylvari, you make the right choice, you will learn that there are other pale trees out there. There are Sylvari out there that were not born from the pale tree that we know. There are other trees, and the question is, well, what do those civilizations look like? We actually meet a Sylvari from one of those trees. He's called Malik. Once upon a time, the Heart of Thorns expansion was going to include a lot of this subject material, but it got cut for time. That means it's still ripe today. So I think this could be very, very good. There's also the question of what's going on with the pale tree since it was injured. Is it okay? You know, actually catching up on that. But also the identity of the Sylvari. In a lot of ways, the Sylvari felt like Tyria sort of rising back up to fight against the Elder Dragons. Well, now that there are no Elder Dragons, what can we think about with the Sylvari? What's their place in the world? I like the idea of a bunch of Sylvari were being given these wild hunts to fight against dragon minions. And now, what are the new wild hunts become? Imagine we just start a story very quietly, very humbly, and a Sylvari is talking about how they've got a wild hunt and they're being compelled to do this thing, and we have no idea what it is or why. Like, and that's suddenly really captivating and exciting because we have no idea where it's leading or what the dream of dreams might be trying to do. So I think it's a great time to return to all these big topics. The other big thing as well is the Sylvari, when they were written into Guild Wars 2, there's this idea that they're all very young. They're just being born out of their pods. The oldest of them are in their 20s. Well, hold on. Guild Wars 2 is 10 years old now. And, you know, with the Elder Dragons written out and stuff, I like the idea that they may finally start dealing with stories where we realize, oh, Sylvari can die of old age. And maybe they get ill, and maybe, you know, they start falling apart. And we sort of see this, the recession of the Sylvari in some ways. I like to see them kind of just shake up that civilization. So that's the story ideas, but I know what you're wondering. Well, what about the maps, WP? Where would we explore? We've already kind of been all around there. Well, hold on. Number one, I think you could get an amazing map that is the Echovald Forest. So there's the Wardens in Cantha. There's these little hints about Urgos, the spirit there, and, you know, maybe connections between the Sylvari and the Wardens that they're just sort of scratching at. Also, if this next patch cycle for End of Dragons ends with just the Jade Sea, when are we ever going to get to follow this stuff up? So this expansion, I think, would be a great time to see more of the Echovald. That would be one map. I'd love to see, like, the deep Echovald. Next, I think Maguma Jungle would be a great place for the map as well. Heart of Thorns, obviously, is the main stuff. But let's look at this. The western coast of Tyria. Come on. There's this whole coastline now. I'm sure there's a pale tree here. This would be an amazing place to go. And do you know what? There's one fantasy that I loved that they were setting up for Guild Wars 2 way back in the day with Eye of the North that they never quite did. And that's that they kind of created this idea that the Tarnished Coast, and when they say the Tarnished Coast, they really mean the southern coastline around here. The idea was like this place was like a wild area filled with giant dinosaurs roaming around. Guys, I don't know whether I'm alone in this. I love dinosaurs, all right? I really do. And I've always wanted to go to like this primordial kind of like ancient place with these big monsters roaming around. I think ArenaNet can still do that with a west coast, west of the Maguma map that's filled with, you know, these big Jurassic, ancient, old world, like, dinosaurs and things. It would be so cool. And yeah, mix that up with a Sylvari storyline. That's 2 maps. I think another great candidate for a map in a storyline like this, a really good one, is Ore. Because there's this idea of, you know, how Caladbolg cleansed Ore and sort of began to grow the plants there. When we went back to Ore in Siren's Landing very briefly, we were seeing the Sylvari had a very keen interest in what was going on with the Risen bumbling around there. We saw the plant life coming back. I love the idea of a massive, proper, big Ore map that's set another like 7 years down the line. So we properly see Ore is now being reclaimed by nature, and we can really get a big sense of what's going on there. I'd love to go back to like Arar Explorable, except now it's years and years later, and we can see like all the plant life coming back and how the Sylvari want to live with that. So this would be a brilliant expansion, I think. And yeah, you'd have Malik in it, you'd have Kaith in it. We could touch on the Nightmare Court properly and Duchess Chrysantha. There is big space for this one. Next, I've got what I've called the Fate of Janthir. And when I say Janthir there, I mean the territory more than anything else. If you guys aren't too familiar, up here north on the world map, there is an area that looks a lot like the Fire Island chain. It's named the Isles of Janthir. Janthir is a term we usually associate with Masat lore, one of these ancient races that was wiped out mostly with the previous Elder Dragon Rising. And I'm still a sucker for the Masat. I kind of really don't like what they did with the Masat in Season 3. I'd like to see more about the Masat and the Seer War. I'd like to go to this area of the world and see what happened. It looks post-apocalyptic. Is this some casualty in the Masat-Seer War where they blew each other up in some way? Lots of fun stuff there. Bastion the Penitent, the raid takes place kind of near here. They have this idea that they were like forgotten political prisoners. Where is the raid boss Samarog from? All of these are really, really cool questions. I love this area of the world. I want an expansion that's up here. And again, it's interesting because before this announcement of mini expansions, I wasn't quite sure if they'd have the legs to do a big thing here, but now it works perfectly. 3 maps, right? So you can do a map that is north of the Bandit Bridge in Brisbane Wildlands. Finally, we can go through this mysterious exit to a map that's been teased at for years and years and years. So you get one big map that takes you up north, up through the Verdant Cascades and the Delta, and then you have like 2 maps on the Isle of Janthir. I mean, it's perfect. And they can touch on all kinds of old lore here. This expansion, I would have Livia be a major character. Livia is another one of these big, outstanding, mysterious things. How did she extend her life with the Scepter of Ore? The Scepter of Ore is a huge story. I think all of this stuff would be done here. More revelations about the Shining Blade, maybe about the Human Queen, Livia's life extension, and yeah, even, in fact, I'll do you one better. I like the idea that we look into the nature of liches a little bit more, and there's a very old mystery from Guild Wars 1 where a mysterious lich was added to Droknar's Forge, one of the Dwarven capital, in one of the last patches for Guild Wars 1. A strange lich appeared there, and we've never quite they never quite did anything with that story. There might be some dev comments that expand on it a little bit, but it might be cool to see that lich actually finally ends up meaning something. And let's deal with the Scepter of Ore and why it's important, and let's deal with Livia and do it in some of these cool old guard places. Again, this is not territory we could go to in Guild Wars 1, but it was first shown to us on the Guild Wars 1 Eye of the North World map, and it's all Guild Wars 1-y stuff, so long-term lore hounds, and if they want to continue like making expansions that appeal to the old guard, then this is a great choice for that. And I'm not saying all expansions need to, by the way. I've already given you a bunch of ideas here that I've got nothing to do with Guild Wars 1, really. But this would be definitely a really fun one. So, number 9, I've called this one Mist Traveler. The idea here is an expansion in the Mists, and an expansion that starts to deal with the human gods more. So we have some outstanding pieces of information about what the human gods have been doing, especially since Path of Fire, but now maybe we can dig into it. So one of the coolest like storylines that started up around Path of Fire was the Raid Wing, where we went back to the Underworld. So what happened here was Path of Fire revealed to us that the human gods, they all used to own their own like realms in the Mists, like Grenth owned the Underworld. But they're not there anymore. Path of Fire revealed to us that Grenth has abandoned the Underworld. They've all moved on, and in fact, in the main storyline of the Path of Fire, we see Cormyr is lingering a little bit in her realm as she finally leaves. They've all gone to some new place they're calling their garden, the Garden of the Gods, some place that they want to make fit. Well, we don't really know exactly what they're doing. That's what's so fascinating about this. But so, when we went to the Underworld in a raid wing, It was a territory in chaos, in flux, with no leader. And we helped this mysterious lady to reclaim control of the area, and she turned out to be Desmina. Desmina, one of the first followers of Grenth, a long-standing character that we'd heard about. We got to meet her. We put her in. We destroyed Doom, one of these demigods. We killed Doom and put Desmina in charge. And if you go back to the last cutscene of that raid wing, it's kind of like a cliffhanger. Like they're saying, was this a good idea? What the hell is Desmina going to do now that she rules the underworld? What's going on there? So I love the idea of an expansion all about these mist realms and what's happening. So we can follow up on this plot thread here. This is where we continue the Desmina story. Has she gone a bit mad and become baddie and we have to fight her, or is something else going on? Is there some big conspiracy? There's not just Desmina, by the way. There's another fascinating character that I want to see called Mausolus. Mausolus was another one of these big Grenth followers. He we haven't seen. We saw Desmina in the raid wing, but what about Mausolus? So having Mausolus in the story would be really cool. And then there's also some other, like, much more recent hints that the devs have given us. Throughout the Icebrood Saga and End of Dragons, there's been this strange mist traveler that we speak to, who's been, you know, hinting about end times and weird stuff. Well, maybe this expansion digs into what he's dealing with. Some people will advocate that we get information about, like, the Harbinger from the Fractals. This is a mysterious character you can speak... God, how many times have I used the word mysterious here? This is an enigmatic character that we can speak to activate, like, challenge modes and stuff. I don't know whether they ever really need to do anything with the Harbinger, but hey. But yeah, they can do lots of stuff with this. Menzies... and what exactly happened there between Balthazar and Menzies, which Path of Fire should have done. They can finally do it. Menzies could be a character when we go to the Fissure of Woe, or, like, we could find his headless corpse, and they could confirm that Balthazar chopped his head off, which would be quite nice. They can clean up a lot of the Balthazar story as well. Why does Balthazar not hate Lissa? You know, he doesn't cry her name out. Why did Balthazar have Lissa's mirror? What's up with Lissa just in general? These are all amazing questions that I think not only would make sense as a good expansion story, but also would make Season 3 and Path of Fire story make more sense. You could also, by the way, now that we've got Su-1 and End of Dragons is done, there is a question, obviously, of, okay, Su-1 made the other Elder Dragons, but why does Su-1 exist? The Mists created Su-1, but why? What was that process? Are there things relating to Su-1 out in the Mists? Well, again, this expansion, I think, a big Mist expansion, here we are. And so 3 maps, right? What do we have for 3 maps? Well, I would say do 1 is the Underworld. And, I mean, other areas beyond just the raid area, you know, we can do the Underworld. One of them can be the Fissure of Woe. Definitely do the Fissure of Woe, because that was accessible in Guild Wars 1. And again, it gives us lots of stuff about Menzies, the Shadow Army, Balthazar, and some of this stuff was hinted at the end of Season 4 as well, by the way, guys, which is quite good. And then they've got another map, a free map to do whatever they like with. I like the idea that we get to go to a realm we've never seen before. Go to Dwayna's Paradise, go to Lissa's realm, maybe go to Melanju's realm, see one of these places properly out there in the mists, and, you know, how they're dealing, what's going on with them now that the gods have left them, and also, since Kralkatorrik tore through a bunch of them and, like, bit chunks out of their realities. Could be good. So number 10 is kind of, I think most of these that I've given you guys, I'm not doing in any particular order. But I believe that this next one I'm going to say, number 10, would be a sequel to the expansion I just illustrated. The Mist expansion. So what would this be? This would be about us visiting not a Mist realm or anything. We're going to another world. We're going to a whole new world in this expansion. I'm calling it the Garden of the Gods. So for this one, I'd have like the Zaician, and Zafira. You know, anyone related to big god stories, basically, I'd have as be major characters here. There's kind of this mystery as well in the game at the moment of... after Balthazar was chained up in the mist, did the gods actually replace him in the Pantheon? There might be a whole other god out there that we can speak to and interact with. So you could have like that as a major character here. But basically, the hint right now is that the human gods have left to create a new world, to tend to a new garden, one without elder dragons, one where they're comfortable and so on. Well, where is that world? I think you could do a sequel to this Mist thing. You could like pair them off. We're not talking about doing a 10-year long story, but we are talking about 2 expansions back to back doing the same story. This second one would be us traveling to a new world that the gods actually went to. An alternative idea is, now that the elder dragons are gone, that the gods return here. And I don't know where that would lead. Would they be antagonists? I mean, what would that do exactly? I don't also know how that leads to new adventures and new areas of the world. So let's say instead we go to them, we go to their new garden. And And just 3 big maps, a bit like I talked about with the Sunrise Crest, where you just get a whole continent and they go big on it. Here's a whole new world that we go to, and it's 3 big maps. Again, like I mentioned with the Depths of Tyria, I think here you would do it like fragments as well. It feels really big and expansive. Another thing you could do here as well, for what it's worth, is you could have 2 maps on this new Garden of the Gods, but you could also do a map on the... also in the lore, there's an idea that the humans were brought to Tyria from somewhere else, that the Tyrians have an alternate... the humans have an alternate homeworld. So you could maybe do 2 maps on the new garden and 1 map on the original human homeworld. So just an expansion about going to other worlds, basically. And Christ, there's a lot they could do there. Number 11, I'm calling this one the Legacy of the Foe Fire. Now, remember how I kind of said let's do a Sylvari big idea expansion? I think what you'll notice is it's quite easy actually to do mini X-packs dedicated to each race. So we've talked about a Sylvari one. Well, a Char one would be really cool. Calling it Legacy of the Foe Fire. And basically, what I'm interested in here, first of all, yes, is the idea of a power struggle amongst the Char for Claw of the to become Kana. Now, the Icebrood Saga already kind of did a Char Civil War. It did it in a really lame, hand-wavy, rushed way, which didn't satisfy me. But now that they've already done it, maybe another Civil War is off the table. At least, you know, maybe we need to be several mini X-packs deep before we can come back to this. But I do still think it could be a good story. But beyond the idea of a Char, like, War of Succession or whatever, I think what would be really good is to look at the Ghost of Ascalon again. And this continual threat of theirs. And maybe we get to end that threat for once and for all. The devs have been cagey about doing big stuff with the Ghost of Ascalon story because for years they hadn't quite figured out, you know, if you end the Ghost of Ascalon threat, doesn't that mean you have to delete all the ghosts from all the Ascalon maps? But nowadays they understand that maps are like frozen in time. So a story like this is actually totally possible. I'd love to see Ghostfire cannons and some of that mysterious old lore and hints that they've got in the Black Citadel actually come forwards. And a Char expansion, I mean, Christ, this is where we could get Bangar back. Bangar is my favourite character. We could do stuff with Bangar. Krisha as well as an amazing character. Ephraim of the new Flame Legion. There's so much good stuff they could do here. Another really long outstanding mystery is in the core storyline, there are twin swords. There's Sahothan and Magdea, okay? And in the core storyline, we hear that Ritlock's obviously got Sahothan, but Magdea goes to be repaired by a Norn Smith. Magdea's out there, and then they've just not talked about it ever again. So finally, I think we get Magdea back, and we talk about that, and we find a way to actually end this threat. So as for the maps, well, I think you can do 1 map, which is a new area of Ascalon, with nice new graphics and, you know, all the system and mechanic changes that the game has had the luxury of improving. You know, an area of Ascalon that we get to go to that wasn't, you know, designed in the year 2010, right? That would be good. I think you could do a map in the Ash Legion homelands and another one in the Blood area, so we actually get to go to the Blood Citadel, which we still haven't seen. So see these other citadels, maybe even something Flame Legion related, all that kind of stuff, east of the Blaze Ridge Mountains. You could have the Ogres be a big part of this storyline. I mean, it writes itself. I mean, it really does. And again, this is another one of those ones where before it was mini X-packs, I wasn't quite sure that a whole expansion that people have to play for 3 years would really be good enough, you know, for this. But now when I imagine, well, this is just a year and a bit of the game, it kind of, it fits perfectly, you know. So next, let's do it for the Norn. I'm calling this one number 12, the Northern Reclamation. We're near the end now, just a couple left. The Northern Reclamation, well, this would be what? The Norn reassessing their place in this world. There's no Jormag anymore. So, do they have to be this far south? Well, maybe they want to go north. And in fact, you've got the Codan as well. So, the idea of the Codan is they are from the, like, ultra north. They're from, like, the Guild Wars Arctic, a place we've never seen. And there's an idea that, you know, Norn may have come from there as well. I like the idea of some big adventure going really far north. We can get some of those weird Guild Wars 1 areas as well. Frostmoors, Jarga Moraine. There's a giant hole that goes... Nobody knows where the hole ends. There's lots of fun ideas of places that we can go for these maps. One map would be probably, you know, Jarga Moraine and some of those Guild Wars 1 locations, just as high up as we can go. And then, you know, one in the Arctic with the Codan. I'm not quite sure where the third map would be on this one. I don't have so much to say on this particular expansion idea. But, you know, I think that's because the Norn generally have been a bit thin on the ground. But new factions of Norn, different kind of transformations, stuff about the Havrunes, and yeah, it could work. And stuff about Coda as well, and the weird voices in the mists that speak to the Codan. And, you know, that can tie into what I would assume through a lot of these expansions is the idea of demons and outside forces and malevolent things are a continual problem, you know, and they're kind of becoming the new enemy rather than just Elder Dragons. And when we're in a world like that, I think the Codan become an incredibly fascinating race with their connection with their voices and their claws. I've also thought that the Codan could be quite antagonistic, actually, as judges of what balance in the world should be. What do the Codan think now that we've messed with the balance so much that there's no Elder Dragons left, you know? I like this idea. Number 13. I'm calling this the Hydra Queen. Now, I don't know about you, this is kind of very personal to me. I really like pirates, I really like boats, I really like vacation-y, you know, summery areas, stretches of sand, stuff like that. And honestly, I think Guild Wars 2's really good at that stuff. In core, there's loads to do with Lion's Arch. And, you know, the Tyder Covington pirates and just all the different factions out there that they haven't really touched on or done much with, really, for years and years and years now. So let's have an expansion for them. You don't just have to do the races, but let's look at Lion's Arch a bit more. Let's look at Ellen Keel, Magnus, Evan Nashblade. Let's have stuff about Lion's Arch. If they've been attacked in like a deep sea expansion by like a giant Hydra, well, this expansion could be like Fallout on that. One of my favourite big mysteries about Guild Wars 2, and this was written for Guild Wars 2, set up in Guild Wars 2, has nothing to do with Guild Wars 1, it's really cool. There is a story in this game about a ghost ship called the Capricorn that is currently adrift, sailing around on its own, lost out there in the unending ocean somewhere. And, you know, there's different NPCs you can speak to. If you've got the key to Old Lion's Arch, you can go back there. I actually did a video recently where we were talking about this. You know, there's been multiple PvP maps about this. It's just really cool. I love this idea of this ghost ship. I love the idea of some of these other pirate factions, you know, rallying up. Maybe even Aether Blades and things can be an interesting storyline here. So yeah, I'm not calling this an underwater expansion, but something more in this arena that would happen years and years later than maybe your previous underwater offering. 3 maps for this expansion. Well, I'd put one at the Mitanni Keys, south of Istan. That's an area of the world that I've always wanted to go to. Big, beautiful white sand beaches, you know, glimmering water. I would love that. You can also have that map have the Latenda Bog as well for a bit of balance, a really grim, nasty, gross, poisonous bog area. This is where I would go back to the Battle Isles. I think that would fit very well. Maybe we find that the Capricorn is at the Battle Isles. And again, maybe you could get the Zaishan or Zafira influence on this expansion instead if you shuffle things around a little bit. And then the next map can just be, you know, out in the sea, some other new continent island, because I've actually been very hands-off. The only one of the many locations we've talked about that you can actually see on the Dermond Priory carpet is the Sunrise Crest. There's loads of other places that they could pick too. And so finally, the last idea, number 14. Well, what have we talked about so far? We've talked about going to the God Realms in the Mists. We've talked about going to whole new worlds. But what about this world versus worldy thing? You know, world versus world has established the idea that there are actually alternate Tyrias out there. There are reflections of Tyria. There are alternate realities. And, you know, I wouldn't advocate doing an expansion like this too early. This kind of feels like when you're really running out of road type of storyline. I know other MMOs have done things like this, don't get me wrong. But I do like the idea of an alternate Tyria. I love the idea of going to a Tyria where Elder Dragons never existed at all, or the Sylvari never existed at all. This would be a great time to go back to the old Infinity Ball mystery. You know, from the personal story where we actually interact with an alternate version of ourselves. So we're dumped into a Tyria where the humans are still at war with the Char. You know, a lot of the friction and really powerful world building that once existed in this franchise doesn't exist anymore because too many happy endings have occurred. You know, everything's too stable. Too many treaties have been signed. Too many villains have been kicked to the curb. Well, I love the idea of an expansion where you go to one of these alternate Tyrias. And guess what? Joko is still at large here. Did you feel like Joko got the shaft in Season 3? Well, Joko's back on this one, and he's a big threat. Or Bangar is in a very different position. This is a world where Bangar won in the Civil War. This is a world where there were no Sylvari at all. There was no Traherne, so you know, what ramifications did that have for the Tarnished Coast? The Asura are still underground. There's 1,000 different really fun things that they could twist with Tyria to do like an Elseworld kind of story. And in fact, that doesn't just have to be one expansion. They could do like multiple sequels to that as well if they like. But you know, just for this video, I wanted to talk about some broad concepts. So there you go. So so that's my little rambling discussion. That's what I think of when I think of mini X-Packs. I think at first it sounds like, oh god, what do they even have left to do? What's interesting about the story with this game? Where can we go? But if you take a second to stop and breathe and look at it, I do think there's easily another decade of really compelling stories that they can do. And let's not forget, that's just stuff that's in the game now. Any of the stories that they're about to tell us can expand the scope of the story in any number of ways. Introduce new villains that then get sidelined for a while, come back in other ways, and they could just keep going and going and going. So actually, overall, I have quite high hopes for this. Hopefully this was somewhat interesting to you guys, to talk a bit about story and lore, and how maybe that maps into the mini X-Pack system. Thanks very much for watching, guys. If you got to the end of this, this has been very wordy and very long, and I haven't really had, you know, captivating gameplay footage in the background. Let me know what you think, really. I'm very, very curious in your opinions, or if there's other storylines you think I didn't even touch on here. So thanks, guys. To tell you the truth, with this video having been done now, I don't really have any amazing bursting concepts I'm desperate to talk about with the mini X-Pack news. You know, we did stuff about, like, elite spec substitutes yesterday. We're doing this today. I don't really know what else there is to talk about. Maybe I can do one final video on features. But after that, I think we're back to just sort of waiting to see what ArenaNet says. And obviously there's a patch coming up. But yeah, so let me know. Hope you guys enjoyed all the content I've put out. You know, if ArenaNet give us meaningful things to talk about, then I'm always going to have fun actually doing it. And yeah, take care, everybody. Hope you enjoy, and I'll see you in the comments.